So to start things off, this is the new hero talent that's coming in the War Within. Basically, the War Within has this new system where you are able to choose one of two options for every spec. So every spec has two different ways that they can go. For Fire Mage, those two specs are Sun Fury, which is the more fire-oriented one, and we have Frostfire, which is obviously the more frost-oriented one. So I previously wrote about Frostfire Mage whenever I was talking about what my wish list would be for the War Within as fire. You know, in the past, Mages had Frostfire Bolt. I was kind of making some predictions about what Frostfire might be, talking about how obviously we're going to get Frostfire Bolt back, but we're probably going to have some spells that have Frost and Fire. So I also talked about how it'd be really cool if it dipped into multicasting or spell combos, and how that would kind of fit the hybrid spell theme of Frostfire. But I wasn't sure what it would look like. So now we actually have information on what this looks like. And I'm actually going to go over all of the important talents here, but you can always click on the article and then mouse over each individual talent. So the way that this works is whenever you choose the hero talents, so if you choose to be Frostfire, you get all these talents. The only difference between Frostfire Mages is going to be the choice options here. So that's going to be defensive option here, another defensive option or utility option, and then this is the only one that actually affects damage, and it's very minimal. We're talking like a stacking buff or reduced cast time on Frostfire Bolt. But everything else is locked in. So these hero talents are very cookie cutter, I guess, because you just get the full package with them, which I think is actually a really good idea. This is a good way to approach this. Okay, so what is Frostfire Mage? As the name implies, Frostfire is a combination of frost and fire, obviously. In the past, Mages had Frostfire Bolt. That spell scaled with talents from both the Frost and the Fire tree. That's why we played it back in Wrath of the Lich King. Spell was later moved to be Frost exclusive. That was your Brain Freeze proc, and then they changed that into Flurry. So we lost the spell, but now we're getting it back. And we're getting it back with a lot more to it, right? There's a whole system of buffs and stuff that's built around this whole concept. Okay, so the core components. If you want to distill this down to like the most basic terms, essentially how this works is you have buffs for each element. So if you choose Frostfire, you're going to have a fire buff and you're going to have a frost buff. And both of those buffs just give you stats. So you can get up to 8 stacks of each. That's going to increase your secondary stats. It's going to be mastery and haste. Obviously crit, not as useful for frost and for fire. So it's good that that one's excluded. But these are separate and you get them from the spells themselves. So fire mastery you get from fire spells, frost you get from frost spells. And then Frostfire Bolt obviously will give us both stacks. Just to recap, simplified version is Frostfire has 2 main buffs you stack using the elements, one for fire, one for frost. These buffs can be stacked up to 8 times in a 12-second window. This does increase the stacks, but it does not refresh duration whenever you get stacks. So you basically have 12 seconds to reach 8 stacks. There's a bonus for reaching 8 stacks. If you don't reach it, obviously you don't get the bonus. And if you get the bonus early, then there's no benefit to keeping going on that stack, right? So in a way, this is kind of giving it like a window where you're going to think about your rotation in terms of 12-second intervals if you aren't able to reach max stacks easily. Like if you had to go out of your way to reach max stacks, which we don't actually know. We don't know how the proc rates are going to be on this. We don't know a lot about some of the other components we'll talk about in just a little bit that might affect this. But just at face value, we can assume that 12 seconds is kind of like the window that you're working with. You might be able to click the buff off. Probably is a bad idea if they let us do that, because we would definitely do that. But we'll talk about that in just a little bit. When you max the fire buff, you gain a free living bomb and cooldown reduction on Phoenix Flame. So that one's like pretty minimal, right? You just get, boom, free living bomb, goes off, Phoenix Flame gets reduced cooldown, and not too important. The frost buff, though, procs Ice Nova, which is a really awesome spell. And then it also gives us cooldown reduction on Meteor. Meteor is a much more important spell. So getting the cooldown reduction on Meteor is a lot bigger of a deal. And then we also get a replacement spell. So Fireball becomes Frostfire Bolt, just straight up. You no longer have Fireball, you get Frostfire Bolt instead. This is going to generate both stacks, like I mentioned before, and it is a reduced cast time. If you look, so Fireball is at 2.25 cast time, Frostfire Bolt is 2 seconds. So it's actually about a little over 10% faster, just innately. And that's important because it means that, number one, it's going to be a little bit weirder with haste. I think it'll still be fine, but definitely a little strange with haste if it gets too short and we get too much haste. And then also it means that we'll just generate more hot streaks, right? Because hot streaks can be thought of as like, essentially when you're thinking about hot streaks, you're thinking about how many casts you're able to generate heating ups from per minute and converting those using your cooldowns on like Fire Blast and other guaranteed crit spells. So essentially you can think of this as probably about 10% or somewhere between 0 and 10% more hot streaks generated. And then, like I mentioned, it generates stacks of both buffs, but it also is modified by spells. So any spell that modifies Fireball, since this is a replacement, is now going to affect Frostfire Bolt. This is important because there are a lot of spells we have that affect Fireball. Stuff like Pyrotechnics, which is just crit chance. Stuff like Flame Accelerant, that's increased damage and reduced cast time. And also, obviously, Firestarter. Flash Freeze Burn instantly grants max stacks with combustion. So if you pop your cooldown, you're going to instantly get maximum stacks of XX Fire and XS Frost. So both of those will proc their respective things that they proc at max stacks. So if we are able to cancel aura this, we'd probably do it right before combustion. You'd probably have just a cancel aura macro inside your combustion macro that cancels both out so that you can instantly go up to max stacks again, get the bonus again for maxing out. So Frostfire Bolt is an awesome spell. It looks like this up here if you aren't familiar with it. Really cool looking spell. It's got like this fire around it. It's got like the frost inside part. Really cool looking. It's going to be generating those stacks for us. Also, we have other things that are going to be modifying it. So we have a talent here that's going to randomly give us max stacks and also make our next Frostfire Bolt instant, guaranteed crit, and explosive. That is called Frostfire Empowerment. So it says, chance when casting spells to activate Flash Freeze Burn. That's the max stacks buff that we get from combustion. And make your next Frostfire Bolt instant, guaranteed crit, and explosive. The explosive is going to be about 80% of the damage on nearby targets. And obviously with the proc rate on this thing, it's going to be important to note because if this thing procs a lot, then that will change one of the choice nodes we might pick. But we'll have to know what the proc rate is on this thing. It would also affect how much we might cancel aura the buff too. So Frostfire Bolt is the builder for Fire Mage, so having it randomly be instant and guaranteed crit is going to just mean we get more hot streaks, right? We're going to get more Pyroblasts, we're going to get more Flame Strikes. Also, the spell being instant too means we'll just get more cast off as well. When two spells hit at the same time as a Fire Mage, I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with the term Pyro Fishing. If you have two spells fire off at the same time, and one of them crits and one doesn't crit, it doesn't matter the order. There's actually a grace period, and it will just look at the crit as, oh, okay, well, that's heating up or hot streak, right? Essentially, if you're casting a Frostfire Bolt and this procs and you double cast, like you send off two Frostfire Bolts at the same time, one of those is always going to crit with this buff, which means that you're always going to either get a heating up or a hot streak from that, right? Because the grace window is always going to be nice to you, essentially, and give you that benefit. Okay, and then Isothermic Core. So this is the talent over here on the left-hand side. This talent is awesome. It makes it so that whenever we Meteor, we also Comet Storm. And for Frost, if you Comet Storm, we also Meteor. That one's actually insane for them because they always put up Winter's Chill. That's the Flurry buff. So that means that both of those spells are going to crit as a Frost Mage. But for Fire, this just means we get added damage with Comet Storm. And we can assume that Comet Storm is probably going to give us Frostfire Empowerment. Now, how much it gives us is actually up for debate. Like, it could just give us the 1, or it could give us 7 stacks because Comet Storm actually hits 7 times. We don't know. We'll have to see it in practice. But either way, it's really awesome that we're getting all of this buff to Meteor. The only thing that I'm a little concerned about it is that it basically forces us to pick the Meteor talents. Like, I don't see a world where we don't pick Meteor if this interacts with the Meteor talents. Yeah, so we're already going super far out of the way for Firefall, this talent over here. We basically pick like 2 dead nodes in single target just to get to it. And this is the one where we randomly call down a Meteor. We don't know if this is going to work with Isothermic Core yet. We'll have to wait and see, but if it does, we would definitely always be taking this talent. And obviously, Meteor is just a fantastic talent to pick up too, because we're going to be proccing all those Comet Storms. You don't get anything out of this talent if you don't have Meteor talents. So you have to have the Meteor talents for this to work. So let's talk about the choice nodes. So up first, we have Thermal Conditioning, which is the node where basically we get a reduced cast time on Frostfire Bolt, and we have Severe Temperatures, which makes it so that we just generate stacks on Frostfire Bolt. So it's going to deal more damage, up to 30% more damage. And the choice between these two really just comes down to how much we think we would need to cast Frostfire Bolt. The more you cast Frostfire Bolt, the more Thermal Conditioning is better for you, right? Because it's reduced cast time. So you're saving more time the more Frostfire Bolts you cast. Whereas for Severe Temperatures, it's a little bit in the opposite direction. It's like the more times you cast other spells between your Frostfire Bolts, the more value you get out of this. Because you're buffing your Frostfire Bolt by casting the other spells. So we'll have to wait and see like which one we pick. I think it may actually be situational. Because if you think about it, it kind of depends on what you're playing. Like how many of your casts are going to be fireballs? If you're looking in single target on the boss where it has like a normal HP pool, a lot of your casts are going to be fireballs, right? Most of your casts. Because most of the time you're casting, it's either Pyroblast or Fireball, right? Whereas if a boss is, let's say, below 30% health, we may not cast really any Fireballs, right? Because it might just be Scorch gaming. So it's important to note what the situation is, and the context is important here because this will determine which of the choice notes we want. But luckily, we can swap between them, no problem. So I'm going to predict that Thermal Conditioning is probably going to be generally the better option, but Severe Temperatures is going to be better for any time where our casts of Fireballs are reduced. Maybe like Mythic Plus, maybe on special bosses. And also it kind of depends on the tuning too. Like if we get a lot of Frostfire Empowerment buffs, like if we just innately generate a lot of this, that's making our next Frostfire Bolt instant casts, well then the reduced cast time doesn't really do much for us, does it, right? Because it's going to be instant cast anyway. So the other important thing to note in this is how much we're proccing Frostfire Empowerment. It's going to be important to know that before we make a decision on which one of these is the better of the two. And then moving down the list, we have Imbued Warding and Meltdown. So the choice node right here is between a utility and defensive option. So with Imbued Warding, we just get 25% more barrier. So that's going to be for our own Blazing Barrier. That's going to be for Mass Barrier. Essentially, we're just getting the effects of the Frost Mage Barrier too. And then we also have Meltdown. So Meltdown is Ice Block, allows us to move. We can like move our little feats in it. These are just Torghast powers if you think about it, right? Because Imbued Warding is basically memory of Triune Ward. Meltdown is the thing where you could move during your Ice Block. And also after your Ice Block finishes, you get a Blast Wave. But yeah, I mean, generally speaking, Imbued Warding is going to be the better option of the two. But I could see Meltdown being maybe situationally useful, like maybe in PvP. There might be some bosses where it's kind of useful, but yeah, no, I think it's Imbued Warding, like for the most part. And then the next choice node is Elemental Affinity versus Flame and Frost. So this one's just 10% cooldown reduction on all Frost spells versus having them reset whenever you cauterize, but not Ice Block. It does not include Ice Block on this second one. So proccing Cauterize on purpose is kind of stupid, and I don't think you would ever really go Flame and Frost here, unless it's like a very situational thing, maybe PvP. Right, but I don't know. I think Elemental Affinity is going to be like the go-to option here. A lot of these spells are actually kind of funny. Like you wouldn't expect them to be Frost. Like Mass Barrier, for instance, this is a Frost spell. So Mass Barrier is Frost, and that means its cooldown will be reduced by Elemental Affinity. That's pretty powerful. And then if you pair that with Imbued Warding, everyone is also getting 25% more barriers from your Mass Barrier. So that's also pretty good. We also have Ice Flows. Ice Flows, fantastic talent, right? This is now going to be an 18-second recharge if you pick Elemental Affinity. So you just get more Ice Flows. We get more Ice Novas. We get more Frost Novas. We get more Cone of Colds. We get more Ring of Frost. Those aren't really all that important, but Ice Block is great. We're getting 10% reduced cooldown on Ice Block. We can already reduce this down to 3 minutes. I don't know if the 10% is going to be of the baseline duration. So would it be 10% of 4 minutes, or would it be 10% of 3 minutes with the talent? I don't really know. It just depends on how they do the conversion on this thing. But no matter how you look at it, Ice Block is going to have reduced cooldown, and that's really great. So the Frost version of this actually gets fire spells reduced cooldown by 30%. That's actually kind of crazy because it means that their Blast Wave and their Dragon's Breath, both fantastic utility spells in Mythic Plus, both of those are going to be available a lot more, right? 30% more. And then for Flame and Frost, for Frost, they get Cold Snap resets the cooldown of your fire spells. So you could essentially do a Dragon's Breath, Cold Snap, Dragon's Breath, or Blast Wave. Yeah, I could see this being like insanely powerful in PvP. So I think for Frost Mages in PvP, you probably pick this talent. I think in Mythic Plus too, it might be really useful to pick Flame and Frost. Yeah, just really strong talent overall. And then, so what's the verdict, right? What's the bottom line here? So the design of Frostfire is definitely driven a lot by the aesthetic of Frostfire Bolt. Like it's very much about how it looks. It's not so much about the gameplay, but that's fine. It's not a bad deal. I'm still holding out for Sun Fury to be more of a gameplay change to Fire. Like I'm looking for something that kind of mixes things up, but I'm okay with one being more aesthetic driven. You're just kind of adding like a streak of blue to your spells, right? Which is kind of cool. And you also get some flavor with some instant cast procs. You get a nice addition of another buff. There already are a lot of buffs that Fire Mages are managing, so I'm not sure if I necessarily like the idea of having all of these other buffs added on top to now manage, but I think for Fire, you probably won't pay too much attention to it, except for like if you're about to cap out and the buff is about to fall off, maybe you throw in like a random frost spell just to get the proc. I don't know. We'll have to wait and see. Sims will tell us what to do. But overall, I think that this is a pretty awesome way to go about it. And I'm definitely looking forward to getting Frostfire Bolt back as fire, because I think that it just looks cool. And that's the main thing about it that I like. So the main question I have is, what is the proc rate on Frostfire Empowerment? What is the proc rate on Frostfire Infusion? This is the one where instantly you trigger a Frostfire Bolt. It's just free, just shoots off, and it generates Frostfire Mastery. So you get a stack of each whenever this thing hits. Because that's going to affect how it plays, right? We need to know the proc rates to know how this thing is going to play. So I'm a little disappointed by the lack of gameplay changes. Obviously, I want to see more gameplay changes, right? But I think it's overall like a pretty awesome setup. And of all the hero talents we've seen so far that I've reviewed, I think this one is actually the coolest. So I'm definitely looking forward to this. And, you know, I'm ready to see Frostfire in action. I want to see it like actually in the game. I can't wait for Alpha to come out so I can play this. And I also want to see Sun Fury. Sun Fury is going to be really cool, I think. If they're going with like this kind of build for it, this seems like very well thought out. I think that Sun Fury might be really awesome too. So yeah, what do you think about Frostfire? How are you feeling about this so far? I know a lot of mages are just really excited just to see Frostfire Bolt come back. I'd be interested to know what your thoughts are, chat. Let's look at the Wowhead comments, because they're always a good time. We always love to review the Wowhead comments because they're usually like completely deranged. I'm excited for the new spell visuals. Glad the developers are focusing on aesthetics and bringing Frostfire Mage fantasy alive rather than a gameplay shift. Yeah, people are talking about mass barrier. Buff duration is per stack. It could probably do some weird stuff. Yeah, that's cancel aura stuff. I mentioned that. Minimal gameplay changes is what you want. I love the theme. Already thinking about making Fire Mage my main in the next expansion, but I do wish it had used even just one actual frost spell. Okay. Well, I guess we technically have Frostbolt. If they don't change how barriers are approached, mages will be in every Mythic Plus pushing group. Yeah, so mass barrier is just 25% more, and it's 10% less cooldown. So that's pretty awesome. It's a lot more mass barrier, and mass barrier is like one of the strongest utility spells. So kind of crazy that mage is getting that benefit there. Yeah, we still have Frostbolt. See, so you could throw on the Frostbolt just to get an extra frost stack, but I mean, like, why would you do that? Yeah, I think you just throw on the Frostfire Bolt. You just complain about everything. These hero talents are supposed to have a little impact on gameplay. Bro, everything in here is positive, except for, like, I can't help but feel a little disappointed. That is the only thing I wrote in here about negative. The rest of this is glowing positive review. And you know what? I think the reason why people are writing this stuff is because of the I didn't make this, by the way. I didn't make this title for the article. Like, Wowhead wrote this. So, like, I think this part, but minimal gameplay changes. I think this is what's triggering the Wowhead commenters. Even though that's like one line in my verdict, but okay, whatever. I mean, I think it's a good headline. That pretty much summarizes it, right? We didn't say it's a bad thing. In fact, I even like went out of my way to mention it at the very start. Like, that's not necessarily a bad thing. If they could just balance an alternative capstone to Sun King's Blessing to have competitive DPS, so we weren't locked into this current awful iteration of Fire. Yeah. No, I agree. It's just this is one way they could have done it, but they didn't, which is fine. But no, that's a good take. Okay. The comments were actually really tame. That was completely normal, I feel like. Lux says, mass barrier is nuts already. Why do we need more? Hey, man, don't argue. Don't argue. It's just, you know, just accept it. Just let it happen. It's great. We love it. I just want Cinderstorm back. Whoa. Halonen, that is a hot take, my dude. That is the hottest of takes. Cinderstorm. Oh my god, what a nightmare of a spell. It was actually kind of cool though, hitting with all of the cinders. Like, that was like a skill shot, you know? Yeah, it's funny. That spell is like universally hated, but the people who love it, love it. I didn't hate it. I didn't love it. I was very neutral on it. Like, I had no problem with it. It was just a little awkward. Finding that like 32-yard range or whatever it was where they all lined up was just like a skill thing, you know? You just got good at it. But it was a little annoying sometimes whenever it would like fly.